This week, one of the most productive bass lures you will find is a crankbait. But are you maximizing this bait? Kevin explains all as we go in depth. Then Rick Clun says to be a better bass angler, you've got to keep good records. First up, my good friend Timmy Horton says to find the bass, you've got to find the bait. It's this week's Fishing in 4.
There he is. Well, that fish was up there in about 2 foot of water. That's where they're gonna be. Ah, don't you jump. You know, we've been in the summer months all year and those bait fish have been out deep. But now, all of the shad are up really shallow. And when they do that, the bass are gonna follow. You know, the bass don't move shallow in the fall of the year because it's necessarily what they want to do. They do it because they gotta eat, and that's where the bait fish are. You know, we're gonna talk about bait fish and bait fish movements today. That's gonna be the key of the Fishing in 4 segment today. Most bass are gonna be active close to the surface today. That's when you're gonna use a lipless crankbait or a topwater to really cover a lot of water because they're gonna be up in that top of the water column. I tell you, the most important thing to note in bass fishing, I don't care if bass are feeding on crayfish, if they're feeding on willow flies in the spring or shad, you really got to follow what they're eating. Shad is the most dominant prey that bass feed upon. And if you can figure out what the shad are doing, you're going to find the bass. When I put into the lake, that's the first thing I look for at my depth finder and see how deep the bait fish are. I'm noticing a lot of bait fish up really high on my graph. The water temperature is 68 degrees, and that's the comfort zone of the threadfin shad that these bass are feeding on. A lot of people think that the bass move throughout the seasons, but they really don't. It's the shad that moves, and the bass follows them because they have to be able to eat. The most important thing you can do is follow the bait fish. As you can see, a lot of bait fish up here in 2 and 4 foot of water. It's almost solid. The bass are really up high. That tells me we're gonna fish shallow today. I've come back in this creek, and out in the mouth there wasn't a lot of bait fish. I've come about 1/3 of the way back, and I'm seeing a lot of shad now flicking on the surface. That's one thing you want to look for because the shad are going to be either all the way in the back, halfway back, or all the way out into the main river. Once you find them, you can go to the different creeks on the lake you're fishing and duplicate it all over the lake. Almost every one of these strikes is when I'm pulling it up off the bottom and it's fluttering down, and when I reel back up and pull the next time, that's when the fish is on there. Very seldom do they hit it when you pull it. It's always when it's falling. Oh, look at this big old spot. Oh, look, choked it. What a big old Coosa River spotted bass. Oh, yeah, he's spitting up shad. Bait fish, it's all about the bait fish. When he come in, he was spitting them up. Finding those shad up shallow, that is the key. I'm breathing hard because I'm excited. I love that. Let's see if we can get another. If you can visualize what we have here, this shelf is about 2 to 4 foot. It's really shallow on top. It's lined with some stumps. And then there's a wall that falls off into 8 foot. And those shad are just sitting right up against that wall. And when I pull that bait off of that 2 to 4 foot and it flutters down into that 7 and 8, that's where those spotted bass are grabbing it. Another one. Look at this one. Oh my goodness. Did you come on? Did you come on? Look at there. Oh, another big tub. Another giant spot. If you find the bait fish, you will find them. They have to be around them. That's where they're going to be. That was back-to-back casts. Is that not fun or what?
Kevin Van Dam knows to be successful, you need to master all techniques. Today, he discusses powerful ways to fish a crankbait as we go in depth.
Nothing better than a deep diving crankbait. big water today, Lake Erie, and we're looking for big smallmouths. One of the best ways to find them out here is throw a big deep diving crankbait on these humps and ridges and channel edges and anything that we can find, any of these edges. There's a lot of current out here all over the lake, and these fish position on very small spots, so it's hard to find them with a slow moving bait. I like to fish that crankbait because I can cover so much water. I'm gonna spend a lot of time graphing, looking for these humps and edges and try to find irregularity that the fish can position themselves on and ambush bait on. That's the key forage out here, is shad, alewives, perch, things like that. So a crankbait is a great way to catch these fish. Let's see what we can find. There's a good one. Nothing like deep cranking to find those big smallies. When the water's dirty, there's a lot of techniques that you can use to catch these fish. Deep cranking is probably the best thing there is to find them. Out here, there's so many miles of this stuff that, you know, if you're fishing slow with a tube or drop shot or something like that, it just takes forever to find them. Wow, a whole bunch of big ones there. Solid 4-pounder right there. When they're on ledges like this, they're mainly feeding on bait fish and stuff, so you want something that's going to really imitate that. This crankbait right here, that one color, I've won 2 Bassmaster Elite Series tournaments on this season alone. That's called Sexy Shad right there. That's probably the most sought after crankbait there is right now. One of the things that you really have to do is keep a close eye on that line. Out here on the Great Lakes like this, all these rocks are covered with zebra mussels. In just a few minutes, you can have your line all frayed up. Even this fluorocarbon, which is what I love to use. It's the toughest there is around zebra mussels. You still gotta check that knot. They're chasing it down. Oh, got him, big one too. There's a whole, look at the wolf pack with him too. There's a bunch right there. That's the great thing about smallmouths is you'll find big groups of them like that. You know, the thing about fishing crankbaits in the summer that a lot of people don't get, we'll let him go because I'm gonna get right back out there, is that you gotta trigger these fish into striking. And most people, when they get that bait hitting the bottom, they kind of like to slow that retrieve down. That's not what I wanna do. It doesn't matter if I'm, you know, fishing for largemouths or, you know, cranking from Alabama to Michigan. There it is. You gotta have that fast retrieve like that to trigger these fish into biting. I really learned that earlier this year at a tournament at Grand Lake. It's not a big one, but there is a school out there that is unbelievable. Earlier this year in a tournament at Grand Lake, I was throwing the same plug and, you know, it was real hot and the water was pretty stained. And I was fishing a big crankbait like this up in shallow water and just burning it along, you know, the same setup that I've got right here, and just really smoking that crankbait. And the fish were inactive, but with that high-speed retrieve and just burning it, and that bait's just kicking off the rocks and stuff like that, it was triggering those fish to bite. There he is. There he is. Boy, there's one spot right there. If I hit that one little rock pile, I get a bite every cast. One thing to me that's real critical when I'm cranking like this, I always use a fiberglass rod. And a lot of people think of fiberglass as not being very sensitive, but if you use a good quality E-glass type rod like this right here, it's actually real light in weight, it's real sensitive, but what's great about glass is the way that it unloads and slowly reacts when that bait is bouncing off the bottom. And when you're playing a fish like this around the boat, it also helps too. I mean, the soft tip in that rod will flex for you, but you know, that rod I can really feel everything with, and I get great control of the bait. I can cast it a long ways. It's 7 foot. It's got a medium action. It's real soft in the tip. It's got a big barrel here. I can cast it a mile, but yet I got a great feel, and it's light enough that I can fish with it all day long. This makes a big difference in my crankbait fishing.
One thing we can't stress enough, deep cranking is hard on your line. You're really putting your line to the test. You're abusing it. All that pulling, hitting the bottom, retie often. I can't stress that enough. You've got to retie when you're deep cranking.
There's a big one right there. That is the kind you're looking for. These Great Lakes fish are just so nice, man. That never gets old right there. It can be a little bit intimidating when you first go offshore and start cranking, looking for ledges and drops and humps and things and trying to find fish. There's a whole lot of area out there and the fish just aren't everywhere. What I'm looking for though is irregularities. Anything that is different from the rest. If you got a drop that's a mile long, anything that's irregular about it, if there's any turns, any little points that jut out a little bit, any little guts that stick in, high spots on it, or a little bit deeper spots, depressions, anything like that is a great place that can hold fish. What the bass are looking for is a place that can help them ambush pods of bait as they come drifting by. Especially if you got current, any type of irregularity like that is where the bass are going to be. There he is. Wow. That one just smoked it. He's not hooked real good either. So often these smallmouth hit it so hard, and the way that they feed on these shad when they're doing it anyways is they try to kill them first and then they go back and eat them. So you end up with a lot of them hooked outside the mouth and right, you know, in the chin, things like that. So you got to be real careful with them. So your equipment makes a big difference. They just never give them. That is a good fish right there. Yeah. Beautiful smallmouth. I really enjoy deep cranking in the summertime, and I'm going to tell you, it's one of the most effective techniques that I've got. The thing that I've really learned though is that your retrieve makes a big difference in the number of fish that you're going to trigger. Lots of times these fish will be sitting on these spots and they're going to be inactive. If they're aggressive, it doesn't matter how you reel that bait, they're going to bite it. But when they're inactive, that's the key. And what I've found is that if I can get that bait down to where it's contacting the bottom and then speed it up. Most people, when they start hitting the bottom and feeling the bottom, they slow down. And sometimes you have to. You know, if you're fishing brush piles, things like that, you got to slow it down a little bit just to work it through there. But when I'm fishing hard, clean bottom areas, shell beds, rock piles, gravel bars, things like that, a fast retrieve, cast it out there, get it down to hit the bottom, and then speed it up. The crankbait's going to get to its maximum depth with a slow retrieve. But once I hit the bottom, I'm going to speed that bait up. It makes that bait dart erratically as it's ricocheting off the cover. Really good crankbaits, the best ones, are the ones that dart the most erratically when they're hitting that cover. And that's what triggers them into striking. I've won 2 tournaments this year burning crankbaits on offshore structure like that. A slow retrieve, I wouldn't get a bite. A fast retrieve, boom, you got one almost every cast. That's what you got to do. Got him. Got him. That one got hung on the bottom. And then it came undone and that fish hit it. Anytime you can change that pace, that's why I say burning it real quick and then slowing it down, speeding it up. It got hung up and I popped my line and got it free and he got it. Boy, he's barely got it. Look at that, he just spit out a bunch of shad right there. You can see they're eating the same thing that I'm throwing them. Chunk though. One of the hardest things out here is really boat positioning. You know, it can get so windy out here on the Great Lakes that it makes it tricky. And then too, you know, there's always current out here. It doesn't matter if you're fishing, you know, near a river or out in the main lake, there's a lot of current. So it's real important to pay attention to that current because that's the key to this crankbait bite. If you got some current out here, if you can position the boat downstream and throw that crankbait and get it to come in contact with the bottom, because those fish will be facing right into the current. They're going to be on these little rock piles, anything that breaks it, just waiting for balls of shad to come by. And that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions there is about smallmouth, is how much they like to eat crayfish. Well, out here, they like to eat bait fish. They're eating big schools of perch and shad and alewives, and they're always into gobies. So a crankbait imitates bait fish real well. But the positioning of your boat is probably the most important thing. You got to have that bait coming with the current or across the current. There he is. One of the things that's really helped me a ton in my offshore structure fishing is the advent of the GPSs, that they're so accurate now that you can get right back on a spot. So that's what I'm doing. I'm always watching my trail and I'm looking to see exactly where I'm at when I get a bite. As soon as I catch a fish, especially out here when you're out way offshore, I want to mark that spot so I can get back exactly to it. They just don't give up. Get me all wet. Look at that, he was caught in the mouth and ended up in the belly. These triple grips are just hard to beat for smallies like this. They just, once they got them, I don't lose many. Smallmouth are so mean, and no matter what you do, you can't keep them all on. But now I've got this spot marked right on my GPS, and I just caught one fish there, so it's, you know, something I want to go right back and hit again. Check that line. I'm ready to go. You got me soaking
Bass
wet.
will relate to a lot of different ledges, but the thing about a crankbait is it's most effective in those shallower areas. That 8 to 17 foot zone is what I'm really concentrating on. If I'm fishing ledges that are deeper than that, I'm probably going to use a different bait. I'm going to use a jig and spoon, a Carolina rig, you know, a big spinner bait, things like that are more efficient in that zone. But for that mid-range zone, there's nothing better than a deep diving crankbait.
So you had a great day fishing, but will you remember what you did and how you did it? Rick Clunn explains how good record keeping can make the difference in Art of Angling.
You know, unless you have a photographic memory, I highly recommend that at some point, especially early in your career, you start keeping some records. That's what we're really going to discuss today on The Art of Angling, is the proper way and the type of records you need to be keeping. You know, in my early career, I found it necessary to start keeping records just because I didn't feel like I had a very good memory. And I really didn't know what to keep, so I kept a little bit of everything. You know, I wrote down everything that I could think of. You know, in fact, the records got very, very complex. And most of my information came from my bass club days, when I would write down after a Pacific weekend at the lake, you know, what I'd done, which in the beginning wasn't very successful, but I'd still write down, you know, my approach and what hadn't worked for me, what little might have worked for me. And more importantly, I would try to talk to some of my friends to find out what had worked. But the question that I'm often asked is, how detailed of records do you keep? And what I've learned, really, they don't need to be that detailed. I just put down general information, the time of the year, general lake conditions, general weather conditions, and also the level of the lake. And then I'll put the general patterns of how the guys that were successful caught fish. You know, you really shouldn't worry about how scientific or how technical your records are. That's not really what they're for. They're simply a tool to trigger your brain to remember more accurately. They show you how you caught fish in the past, and they allow you to remember more accurately now, so you can apply this information and catch them in the future. And another question I'm often asked about these records is, well, dang, that sounds like a long time. How long do I have to keep these before they're even useful? Well, my experience was that 1 year. 1 year after I started keeping records, they became incredibly useful to me. The example I'll give was that I was actually fishing a bass club tournament on Toledo Bend, a 187,000 acre lake that I'd never fished in my whole life. I didn't know how to fish it, never been there before. So I went back to my records, and in the year before, the same time of the year, we were fishing Sam Rayburn. The guy caught his fish in the back of a creek called Sandy Creek, fishing a creek channel. So I looked on my Toledo Bend map, I picked out a creek. First day of practice, I went back in there into this creek called Caney Creek on Toledo Bend. Caught 4 or 5 fish that day, and thought that was pretty good. It's the best I'd been doing up to that point. Make a long story short, I ended up winning that tournament. I had 15 fish that weighed 35 pounds, and I won my very first bass club tournament. But more important than that win was this little bit of blue book records that I'd keeping that showed me how to fish a 187,000 acre lake I had never been on in my life.